Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Maria Barnes, and I am the chapter president of the AccessUsersGroups.org lunch group, or lunchtime, we usually call it. Welcome. Today's topic is combo boxes and list boxes. Hopefully, if you cannot see or hear something, please try to put something in the chat. If you have a question, at least at this point, there's not very many of us. You can go ahead and unmute and interrupt me and ask. Or if you don't want to do that, you can put the question in the chat, and I'll try to go ahead and answer as we go. Combo boxes or list boxes, either way, you design or create those a couple different ways. You have the option of creating those. One is through the form design controls. You can use a wizard, or you can cancel out of the wizard once it starts, and you can set some of the settings by hand. So for instance, I have a form in design mode. If you're not already clicked on form design, which this opens to, the controls are right in this area. And I might just add that today's presentation is designed for the post-beginner up through the intermediate level. So some of you, if you tend to be more towards the intermediate level, you may have some repeats here, but I'm hoping you still learn a thing or two today. So the combo box looks like this, indeed, when you hover over it, it says combo box underneath it. And then the list box is very similar. It doesn't seem to have the black heading on it, and it looks like this. So either way, you click on that, and then it starts the combo box wizard. And again, you probably are used to using this, or if you want to define all the properties yourself, you can simply cancel out at this point and it's still there. Another way that you can add a combo box control to a form is to add a field to the form that has a lookup defined. So in this case, we have, I'm going to take a look at our table, and I'm going to look at the locations table, and the location state here. So this is a short text field, but if you go to the lookup section, we have defined a combo box lookup, and the RowSource here of states and the RowSourceType of table query. You may not know that you can actually define on this display control which of the three types, either just a straight text box, a list box, or a combo box, is typically used. And so what this is for is a setting so that if you have combo box set here and you go to a form, and that form's data is based on your table, and you go into forms design, add existing fields. If you add a field that has a lookup, that's display control, yes, that's what it's called, display control, is set to combo box, then when you drag that over, it will automatically create the combo box for you. And it's all set up with the same parameters that you have defined in your lookup on the table setup. So that's just indicates two different ways to add a combo box or a list box to a form, either through the form design controls or by adding a field to a form that has a lookup already set. So there's also the availability to right-click on a field and change to, and you get in general the same three selections that are not grayed out. You can change a combo box to a text box or a list box. if this were a list box, you should be able to change it to a text box or a combo box. And then let's take a look real quick at a text. Notice this text is unbound. It doesn't have a control source. So it's not necessary to have a lookup on the actual table field setting in order to use a combo box or a list box. You can still, from a text box, change it to be, in this case, you can also do label. There's one more ungrayed out option, or you can change it to a list box or combo box. So you don't have to delete and recreate. So those are ways that we can actually create a combo box or list box control on a form. So now let's take a closer look. The next few slides are more in detail about combo boxes. And I just want to say up front that many of the fields that are available as far as the properties and even the events and that kind of thing for combo boxes are also available for list boxes. So I have less slides about list boxes because I'm not going to, for the most part, recover the same properties because they operate, if they're the same property, they generally operate the same way. So for a combo box, the two main fields that we have as far as properties are the RowSourceType and the RowSource. So let's take a closer look at that. And I'm going to look here at the, states one column example here. So here's the RowSourceType, and even though it's set above the RowSourceType, I generally set the RowSourceType first, and I think of it as first. There are three options. There's table query, which is one of the more common ones, and there's also value list. And the difference between that is that if you select table query, the row source that you select is going to be some type of SQL select statement. So you can just put a table name in here. You could just put a table name and, especially if there was only one field in the table name as your row source, or you can have a whole select statement. You can use the query builder to build your query. In this case, I'm selecting only state name or state abbreviation rather from my table, and I'm sorting it in ascending order. And then if you choose the value list, here's an example of value list, you have a row source that specifies values with a semicolon in between them. And this particular one happens to be a 2-column count. So we have column 1, column 2, column 1, column 2, that's the second row, column 1, column 2, that's the third row, column 1, column 2, that's the fourth row. Many value lists you see look more like this, where they're just one column and it lists the values separated by semicolons. Then finally, we have something, a row source type called field list. And honestly, I've been working with Access for over 20 years, and I didn't even really know this was there. So the type here, row source type, is field list. And what this does is if you state then in your row source a table name or a query name, this will actually pop up a list of the fields in those. So let me just quick demo how all of those are working. And I'm going to say, no, I don't really want to change. I'm going to go ahead and close this too. And no, I don't really want to change. So here we have combo boxes. We were looking at this one. This pops down a single column. It has a list of states in alphabetical order, and you can choose from them. Here's your value list. You can choose the list here, or we were also looking at this one. Again, it looks visibly the same, and I'll show you a little bit more about how to accomplish that, even though there were 2 rows. And then here's the fields list. We had, if you remember, the state. Let's see, it's the actual, I guess it's called states. Well, here's our states table. It has 4 fields in it, and the field list RowSourceType then makes a drop down of each of the field names in that states table. So that can actually be useful for more complicated types of access functionality, like if you were to be doing some kind of data dictionary or import export. So does anyone have any questions about the actual RowSource field or RowSourceType field?
Not a question, but a comment, Maria.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there is one more thing it can be. It can be a
Besides
custom.
table, you're right. And I wasn't going to mention that till the end. I actually have a link in my last slide to a great complicated type of thing to do. Do you want to talk just very, very briefly about that, Crystal?
Sure, RowSourceType can also be a custom function. And I don't want to go into the details here because there's a lot of them, but I made a video tutorial about it, and Wayne Phillips uses that in his tool to show properties and metadata for files, and that's where I first saw it, and then I put it in a tool also, and I think it's a great way to put information into the list part of a combo or a list box, and especially if you're going to reference anything on a calendar.
There's a link at the end to Crystal demoing in her Learn Access by Crystal how to actually do that. So that's a pretty advanced technique. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the some of the other familiar type properties: bound column, column count, column widths, column heads, and list width, and what those can do for you. So in this case, we have multiple columns showing. We are bound to column 1, and in the format area, we have column count set to 2, and then notice the column widths. Here's a trick that the beginner level developer often doesn't know, but if you put the column width of the first column to be 0 inches, and then here's a semicolon, and then here's the column width of the second column, and then you can put whatever else you want for the second or multiples, then the column, the first column in here is hidden when it displays. So in this case, we are bound to the first column, which is the state abbreviation, but the state names, which happen to be the longer values, are what shows in that combo box. And I'll show you in just a second, but I want to highlight this other one and how that's different. So this one is actually bound to column 2, and we have 2 columns, and we have both of the column widths set. Neither is to 0, so neither of those will be hidden. And the column heads in this case is set to yes as opposed to no for the other, which means that the name of the fields in your table query will show as column headers in your list. And I highly suggest that if you have more than one visible column, unless it's just really self-explanatory, that you do turn the column heads to yes. The other thing that I've done in this example is made use of the list width property, and I've set it to 1.5. So notice that the width of the combo box itself, or the control, is only 1 inches. But when you, and the default for list width is the same, if you don't fill that in, it's the same as the width. So I think here it just auto fills with what the width of the control is typically. But you can change that and make it bigger, and that allows the combo box drop down to expand and show more data that you might not have room for in the actual control on the form. So let's take a quick look at those things. So here's what we were just talking about. This has 2 columns, the abbreviation and the name, and notice how the drop down is wider than the control itself. And again, if we were to take a look, when I choose Arkansas here, this says AR here. And this one, we don't even show that, but here it shows what you selected, but it's actually bound to the other one. So it is showing even though it shows the second column, the data behind the form that's actually stored in the field that you have this bound to would actually be the hidden value, which is what is over here on the left in this case. I also want to talk about the bound column being 0. And here's an example of that. So here we have the bound column actually set to 0, which I hadn't even realized that you could do that, because usually when you think about a bound column, you're thinking about column number 1, column number 2, that kind of thing. But bound column 0 actually allows you, let's take a look at the design view of this, to use instead, or what it binds to is not the actual element. In other words, if I choose the first element here, the value, if I had a control source, would not be none, but it would be the index of the row source. So this is kind of a trick. So if instead of having to do something like this, if I wanted to store a numerical value and having to actually put the numerical choices but hide them like I've done here, where I've bound them to column 1 and I've hidden the first column, you can take a shorter approach and list out just the values and then set the bound column to 0. Now that only works if you're talking about numerical indexes where you would typically, have a 0 through 1 or 0 through whatever choice. In fact, typically I wouldn't even have them select none. I would have blue, green, or red only. But if you do want to take advantage of a bound column 0, it's best to put that none option in there as well. Maybe it's all or something like that. But customers kind of like that anyway, typically to show that. I do want to also clarify that Access uses 0-based numbers to refer to columns when we're talking about the column property. And I am going to make examples of that a little bit later on here. But if you're indexing the first column, you actually index it by column left parentheses 0 right parentheses. However, the bound column property uses 1-base numbers to refer to the columns. That means if the bound column property is set to 1, then you are physically talking about the first column as opposed to the bound column 0 does not mean the first column. Bound column 1 does mean the first column. Hopefully that makes sense, but it is a little bit confusing if you don't explicitly know about the difference in that. Okay, now we're going to talk about another couple other properties. ListRows, AutoExpand. Let's start with those. So the ListRows, which I think I have on all mine here, the default for them is, and I think that's on format here, yes. The default is 16. I don't often change that for a combo box, but know that you can. For instance, on your form, if you had, maybe something else that was taking up space, and when you click on something, you did not want the drop down to show this many and maybe overwrite county or county built, then you could decrease the number of list rows to 5 or something like that. And then you would only see the first 5, and then you're still able to use your slider bar to slide to the rest of them. So that is, there can be an important property. I use it much more often on the list boxes than I do on combo boxes, but I have occasionally used it on combo boxes. Okay, yeah, Crystal looks like she provided a link, which again, I have that at the end here, but it's nice to have that direct link to that RowSource callback function there in the chat. Sorry, I'm obviously not paying close enough attention to the chat, but that was done at 12:14 and I'm noticing it 10 minutes later. I'll try to do better about that.
Kim,
Yes,
how are you?
good.
Good. So on the index bound column, are you assuming then that there's no break like in the red, blue, green on the ID number that would occur? So
Yes.
let's say you had,
Yeah,
there's no break.
it only works if you are going to have a source where there's no break. You could leave the 0 off and then the results you could increment by 1 or anything or something like that. But if you're going to have index numbers that are like 0, 10, 20, 30, then, it's probably not going to work for you to use the bound column 0. You would be better off using a 2-column with the actual indexes listed if you're going to be skipping values.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that was the correct answer, but I just
Yep.
wanted to point that out.
I have a question about that bound column 0. That's interesting. I've never heard of that. But what if your row source is like an SQL statement and what's showing up or maybe what's being stored just isn't unique? Then would that return the index, the row number that they picked on, and then code could figure out what they really want, what they really picked? Because that's a real common problem when people don't have something unique to store for the bound column.
I'm not sure I'm following. So in the control source,
Right, instead
or
of a
you're talking
value.
about in your row source.
Oh, I meant row source, yes.
So
Instead of a value list, it's an SQL statement or a
SQL
query.
statement. Yeah, I highly recommend for your row sources that you always use a distinct value.
Well, yeah, of course, but there are cases where people got data and it isn't.
Right.
And I see these questions in,
Mhm.
on the forums, and especially they might not even have control over the structure.
Yep.
But
Yep.
so it seems like this could be a way to solve that problem.
Well, I would be careful about that because it's physically, whatever your row source is, it would be taking that. So if you had none at the end here, for example, and I know you're talking about a SQL, what you would get for a result would depend upon how you got that result. So if you started typing in your combo box and you typed and it was an autofill or AutoExpand, which is the next property we're going to talk about, you started typing NO, it would select the first item and you would end up with a result of 0. And if you clicked on the drop down and you selected this last one, you would end up with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as your result. So I believe that it physically uses the actual list index in the row source. So if you had multiple ones, you would likely possibly get different results depending upon how you went about choosing that. So I hope that answers your question. But again, I don't want to spend too much more time on that because we'll run out of time if we do.
Yeah, great, thanks. And yeah, something new. I just didn't know about that. It's
No, I
interesting.
didn't either when I went into this. So yeah, and again, I've been doing this for over 20 years. So old dogs learn new tricks too.
And you can add a 0 in the SQL query then by doing an append for the none value. So the queries do work well as opposed to trying to perform.
Yeah, if you need to make a fake value essentially by like using a union with an existing query that doesn't return that, that's a great way to put a fake none in your row source. I think that's what you were talking about, Kim.
Yes, that's what I was talking. Because a lot of times
Yep.
the clients want to tell you it's nothing, and they're afraid to just delete what's there. So having none in the box lets you know they want to clean out the value.
Yep. Okay, so let me also touch on AutoExpand. There it is. It's under data. I just didn't see it the way it was sorted. So AutoExpand is by default, I believe, set to yes, but you can change it to no. And just for clarity, what that means is that when you start typing, you get a filled in, and notice how the M is both not capitalized because I typed a little m, and it's not highlighted in black. You get the combo box to default fill. And so then if you were to like use your tab, it would select the actual item MA. Or if you kept typing, you could get something else like that. And that's different than if AutoExpand is set to no, then M would not have been a valid selection. So you would actually have to select the full value of MA if AutoExpand was set to no, or drop the list down and manually choose your item. So that's what AutoExpand is. Then we also have LimitToList. LimitToList is whether or not you can type something else besides what's in your list. So if LimitToList is set to yes, if you type something else, then it's going to not allow you to. If it's set to unless, and there's another caveat that we'll talk about in just a second. If it's set to no, then you could type something else besides what's in your list, and it would allow you to save that into your bound field. So that's what LimitToList is. And then there's another property, and I'm going to go back to design mode here. This is allow value list edits. And so if you have this set to yes, then you're allowed to actually edit the list, the combo list values by entering a, you can do it in a couple ways. You can enter a value that's not in the list, or you can actually right click on the field and there's an option to edit the value list. If you have this allow allow value list edit set to yes. And I believe that the right click is only actually available if you have also filled in this edit list column here, like I have list items, edit form, sorry. This chooses an actual form. This states form is a form for you to edit states. So let me just demo what happens in that case. So here I'm going to want to, instead of choosing a state that's here, I'm going to want to say DC. And notice how that doesn't highlight or anything. When I select the tab to move off of here, it tells me here that the text I've entered isn't an item in the list, and it asks me if I want to edit the items in the list. And so I could say no here, and then if if I say no here, it doesn't actually add it to the list. Then if I had limit to list set to no, it would let me actually store that value, but I have it set to yes, so it prompts me again. So the other thing you can do is right click and you can choose edit list items. So that's another item. So let's see what happens when I answer differently this time. I'm going to say yes. Not really all that helpful to me. If I say DC and I want to add that item to list, then what I really want is not to be taken to the first record in that list, but I want to be taken to this, and I want DC to be filled in for me. You know, District of Columbia, if I can spell that right. So I actually don't usually use this feature. I usually interrupt the event and I do something a little prettier and nicer. And I am going to demo that in just a bit. We also have, let's see, the inherit value list. And again, something I didn't really realize was there, but let's talk about what that is. So in this case, I think I've got a display color field. This display color field is actually and again, this is bound here to a field in my locations table called display color. So let's take a quick look at that before we get too far into this discussion. Here's my display color, and the lookup for that is a value list. It has blue, green, red, and orange on it. Then I look at my combo box, and it has blue, green, red. So what happens here is when I first added this display color control for the display color field to this form, it brought in all the information from the current lookup source. So at the time I brought this in, on the table itself, the RowSource lookup was only blue, green, red. And so that's what my combo box looks like, because it essentially makes a copy of what the table has when it creates it. And then if you update the locations table and the information in the lookup, it doesn't update the combo boxes for all those connected control source controls in your forms. You have to do that manually. Or in the case of value lists, if you're using value lists, and this only works for value lists, hence it's called inherit value lists, you can set that to yes. And maybe I'll leave it no first and show you. And here I have as choices only blue, green, and red. But if I go and I change that, if you change that to yes, then it grabs or looks at the table for the bound control. And again, it has to be a bound control if you're going to do that, to grab the most updated list. So super handy in the right situations to do that. And notice these are toggle boxes. This is because it uses another value, which I didn't really cover yet, which is, that's actually on the table setup. This uses the allow multiple values, yes. And so then you can actually pick more than one in here. So you can actually save, and I don't really like multi-value fields, but these are multi-value fields where you can save 2 of them like that. All right, questions so far? Got another thing to show later that made that pop up here. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about events. We have 3 events, and this on not in list is the one that I mentioned briefly before, but let's talk first about the difference between the on click or on change and on click events. So I'm going to go into my code here, and here's the change event, and here is the click event. And I am going to publish this database for a point of reference for you to take a look at after our presentation here today. But the states change triggers when you type a letter. So every time you type a letter or you use the arrow key to go down to an item, the change event triggers. It doesn't trigger if you just mouse over it before clicking over it. The click event triggers when you actually click on an item or an arrow or arrow to the item and then select it with enter. So let's just demo that here. Let's see, which one do I have? States. I think that's this one. So if I start typing, I just typed in A and we've got the change event. And then if you hover over like that, it doesn't trigger. If you were to select, there you actually clicked, and that the change event fired as well between that. And it's really not very obvious with the debug stop in there, but each time you would, once you had it selected, now see I've got the change event firing because I arrowed down there. And then here is the not in list. So this is what, right now I have this empty, but I usually, instead of using their default not in list, where you can pull up an actual form, I usually use the not in list event. And then I usually use new data. I open up a form, I add a record to it, I open it up in the add mode, and I set the field that corresponds to the new data amount. And then when it's done, then I use a requery to requery what is added or has been added in the open form. Now, if you use Access's built-in functionality, it does do that query for you. I also wanted to talk briefly about the response. The default response is the error display, and there's also an error continue or an error added option for response. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the AfterUpdate event and the BeforeUpdate event. So the important thing about the BeforeUpdate event that I wanted to show you Not that one. There we go. There are a couple properties here that we have. So let's just clarify the difference between them. Text is what actually shows in the combo box itself directly, even the capitalization that I've got here. Value is what's in the bound column. So in this particular box, we have the first column not showing. It's got a 0 width, and only the second column shows, but value is the first column. And then if you actually access the control without any dot, you get the same thing as the value. And finally, there is an OldValue, and that shows you what it was just beforehand. And that can be useful if you are trying to do something like, you know, if I'm changing from this to that, do something specific. So I typically trap that in BeforeUpdate, but notice here that these, it says below values, meaning these values here are the same in the AfterUpate. OldValue actually does not update until after the AfterUpate event is complete. So that's a little confusing, so I thought I would mention it. And then I also wanted to talk about AfterUpate and how useful it can be. In this case, I'm going to take this CBO states 2, which is this one right here, and when I update that, I am going to update this source of county, because depending upon the value that I choose for this combo box, I want the drop down to show a specific county or a specific state's worth of counties in this box. So in order to do that, I'm using the AfterUpate event here. And I'm trapping that and setting the other combo box, the CBO counties combo box, RowSource, to a SQL statement that has a filter based on the actual value of the state chosen in this event here. I also did something here where I set the actual value of CBO counties to the first item in the list. That's also useful to do. So this is the syntax for doing that. You use ItemData that shows the source for the bound source, and 0 would be the first index. So these are 0 index as opposed to 1 index. So that essentially sets it to the first item. You wouldn't have to set it, but that's just how you do it if you want to. This is actually something called BuildValueListComboBox, which I'll demo in just a minute. All right. Got a couple other videos that Crystal is got on not in list and adding new data. Thank you. Let's go on here to...
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you going to mention drop-down method at any stage?
Yes.
Good.
That's a programmatic. It's not a visible property on the property method. So I have a separate slide about that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to see if I can move a little bit faster here. Listboxes, same RowSourceType, same RowSource. There is one additional field, property rather, in Listboxes. So in Listboxes, take a look at Listboxes. You also have a multi-select option, which
Under other.
thought it was. There we go.
Yep.
Yep, thank you. So multi-select can be 3 types. It can be none, simple, or extended. And so this one here is none. And then this one is simple. and this one is extended. So you can see the difference between the three usefully here. When you have it be none, if you click on an item in the list box, then if you click on another item, it unselects the first item and selects that item. If you have a simple, then you can click on one item and click another item. Notice that both of them are selected. And then to get rid of one, you would click on it again. It's like a toggle. And then the extended, you can do even cooler things. Instead of having to like click like this, you can click and hold down the shift key and click, and you get the whole extended. So it's got a little bit of, you can't do that in this one. If you try that in this one, then you just get the other one, the bottom one selected. So that's the difference between multi-select choices, none, simple, and extended. And then we have also in Listboxes properties that are useful. Take the AfterUpdate event here of Listbox examples to show you that. And this is the fourth item here. This one here. This has two columns in here that we're showing, similar to what you saw in the combo box, but this has it in list box format. And notice that we have more items showing here than here. So this should be ListRows is different in this bottom one than these all fit alike here. Now I don't even see ListRows. Maybe that's only for, that doesn't see. Yeah, you know what? That ListRows is only for combo boxes. So if you want to change what shows in your list box, you just expand the height of your list box. Sorry about that. Just having a brain fog there. But ListCount is how many items are actually in the list. So we have 51 states at this point. So the list count is 51. ListIndex is what item I have selected, number 4 in the list here. Selected, if you have a multi-select, selected and the index, like if this were a multi-select, I could do selected 4 and it would say true. If it's not a multi-select, it always says false, but you could essentially, and I have another example of that if I have time here, that where you can actually go through the items in a list, in a multi-select list, and cursor through from 0 to list index or list count -1 and test to see if the item or items are selected by using this kind of syntax. With you would test for, if me list 4 selected whatever I is equals or is true, then you could do something special with the actual selected items. Column count gives you a list of columns, which in this case is 2. You can reference the item data, and remember that we demoed already how to set the list or the combo box to the first selected by using item data 0. This shows you what the value of the item is, in this case, California. And you can also get the column, or like column 1 is the next column in here. And notice these are, again, 0 index. So I should get California in this case, like that. Okay, so here are those. I did list on the PowerPoint that most of these are read-only. The selected is something you can change, so you can select and unselect. You can also change the column count, but the others are all read-only. And notice that this one, column count, is the only one of these that's actually on the property sheet. So the rest of these are accessible by VBA only. The last slide is talking about programmatically. We already talked about how to select the first item using item data in parentheses 0. You can also refresh the data behind a combo or list using something like my example in here, where I have build the value list combo box. So in this case, just in code, I created a SQL statement and I opened a record set, and I'm flipping through the record set and building onto that SQL statement. I'm just making a value list here. I'm taking each row or each row in my record set and the county name field, and I'm appending it to what's already there and a separator, which is the semicolon, and then I'm setting the row source to that value list. So here's how you could programmatically refresh the data behind. You can also use, if you have a table or query and that's changed, you can use this requery option on your combo or list box. And finally, auto dropdown. Let's see, where do I have that? This is how you do that. So in this particular combo 4, I'm forcing, if it gets the focus on the GotFocus event, I'm forcing the dropdown to open. So let's just give that a quick try and you can see how that works here. Oh, that must have been it here. Yep, see how this opens and drops down for you? So that's how you would do that. Someone else asked a question about that. Regarding the drop-down method, does anyone know of a way to detect if the drop-down is currently visible? Crystal did provide a link to that on how to determine that. So you can see that in the chat right under Ben's question at about 12:50. Thank you for that, Crystal and Ben. Okay, I have one more demo here, and I know we're only like 1 minute to go here. I do want, before I start this, because I will finish this and you can stay if you can, and if you can't, this is going to be recorded and hopefully we can get this up there, you know, within some amount of time, hopefully the next month or so. Crystal did mention that she's got the last month's presentation all ready to go to YouTube. She's just got to get some bandwidth to send it up because it's lengthy. So anyway, next month's normal Access Lunchtime is canceled because I will be at the MVP conference during that time. So we will not have a March presentation, but we'll begin again in April. So this, I'm going to talk here about a form which I'm calling Listbox Advanced. I simply have 2 list boxes here. One on this side that's called like all states, one on this side that's called selected states. This one is empty. This one is filled with a, if we take a look at it here in design mode, it's filled with a RowSourceType value list, and that value list, notice I didn't use the table. I purposely used a value list for this one. On my form open event, or load event rather, I have a procedure. And I'm going to, with a similar to what we just saw about filling that combo list, I'm just flipping through a record set and creating a SQL list. And it's really, it shouldn't say SQL, it should be some other string because it's a value list. I'm setting the row source and I'm setting the first, I'm setting the actual value to be the first item in the list. So I'm doing that through these right here. And then it's got two buttons, and the buttons are designed to move the items from one list to the other. So if I select this and I hit this button, it removes it from this list and it adds it to this list. And let's do a couple more. Do it for, this is multi-select, and so is this. So I can do it for more than one at a time. And then the right button going to the left, if you have something selected on the right side, it does the opposite. It removes it from this list and puts it back in this list. And those are ordered lists in alphabetical order. So here's some code for doing that. And again, I'm not going to go through a lot of it, super detailed just for lack of time, but it's here for you. And I'll load it into the files when we're done. So this one moves it over. And I also made some notes here. So if you had a list box that was not multi-select, then this would be much simpler. You could just add the current value to the list box control on the right using the add item and the actual item value of what you wanted to add. And then you could remove it using the remove item. And this, I guess, would also be if you didn't have any sorting that you wanted to maintain. So you can remove it. Yes.
Sorry, could you just repeat that demo? Add a couple more things to the right-hand side and then move one back to the left. I think something odd happened then.
So add a couple more things to the right.
Yeah.
Oops, I already added that
right.
one.
Now, doesn't matter. Right now, select the second or third one, or select anything other than that. Right, select Florida. Right, now move that across.
You're right. What did it
move? The one above.
So I do have an error in that. I'll fix that before I pass you guys this code.
But just thought I'd mention it. I just wanted to check I hadn't
thank you for pointing that out. I did not notice that when I was flipping through here.
I've done it myself before, and I can't remember what the reason was.
Well, I'm sure I maybe don't have
I think
the right index. I may be using the wrong index someplace.
I think it was to do with headers in my case, but it might not have been.
Yeah, there's no header in this one though, so.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think you have to allow for that.
It could be. It could be an index issue where I need to negate a value because that or something. Anyway, so and these are both very similar. You're in this case, I'm looping through, and again, 0, because it's a 0 index, to the list count -1. I'm testing to see if I have selected that item, and if I have, then I'm looking through, and assuming it's already in a sorted order, I'm looking for the new index. And so I'm testing to see if the item at new index is greater than my other one physically, you know, in like for instance, if I have AR and AZ, then AR is not going to be greater than AZ, but AR is going to be greater than AL. So if I've got it and I find the right spot for it, I exit this, and then if that index is less than the new list box or the list box on the right total count, then I actually use that value after AddItem. So AddItem has an optional parameter that is an index, and it will add it after that index. If not, if it's at the end, then it uses this one and it adds it at the bottom. And then I remove the current value from the other list. And so you can't do that while you're continuing through here, because the minute you do a remove item, nothing is selected in your list. So what I do instead of actually removing it at that point is I store it in an array, and I just increment that. And then at the end, I loop through the array and I remove each of the items in the other list. And then finally, I reselect the first item in each list. The other one does really the same thing. It just moves it the other direction. So again, I will fix that and will get that, both the PowerPoint and the demo database published for you shortly after this meeting. Questions? I see there's some things in the chat. Can you just unmute possibly or re-ask if someone else hasn't already answered your question? Ben, you had a couple questions. Dwayne also provided an example. Oh, let me just go on also to my last slide. This first link that I have is Microsoft's Add a List Box or Combo. It's fairly basic and only has a few properties, but it also has some links to others. This is also a good resource from FMS on top 6 tips. There's been a couple recent presentations in Access ET that are both up on YouTube. Here's 2 links for them. The one is on cascading combo boxes, which I demoed, but this time in a continuous form, which is more tricky. So these are both advanced techniques. And then there's a combo box, a Palooza, that is all about actual classes for combo boxes and extending and expanding on the functionality through the use of classes. It's quite fascinating, but pretty advanced. So, but take a look at that. And finally, that RowSourceType, where you can actually use a callback function instead of choosing one of the RowSource types in Learn Access by Crystal.
Maria, this is Kim. I'm not sure, but if you would like at a future point, I have done some combo boxes which emulate a type ahead concept. So we start to fill and filter the form below based on the values that you're typing in at the top, so that it sort of acts like as you're doing your search, it's limiting what's in the box below. And
yeah, I've seen that. That's very helpful if you've got a large data source.
So that's just another great thing you can do with it. I'm looking for stocks, managing somebody's stocks, and so they're looking for different things. And it works out really pretty nicely, because if it's in any part of the word, it's filtering the list that way. It's not an exact match. It's a like match.
So is that something you have published anywhere, Kim, or are you offering to do another follow-up section?
I'm offering to do it, or I'll look at getting a published version for you to put up so people can see how to do it.
I would love to see that. I was just typing a question about that in the chat.
Yeah, that
I
sounds
made a class
great.
to do that, and it's easy to plug the class into existing applications, but it's got some quirks when you requery.
Right. So I'm not using any kind of a class. I'm actually just managing it with an unbound combo box that then filters what's going on below with a like. And I can show you how that works. And my client loves it. So,
That would be awesome, Kim.
okay.
Talk to me after about scheduling.
Sure.
Okay, so there is another mention here in the comments about MAJP having an excellent example of something like this at Access World Forums. So if you don't want to wait for Kim's presentation, you can take a look at that. I have a feeling based on Ben's comment that that one might be class-based, but
It started out without being class-based, and I added the
so
class.
did it. Okay. Okay.
Match P was me saying his name there. He's done it both class-based and non-class-based. He's done quite a few very, very clever search as you type combos. I haven't got a reference to hand though.
Okay.
I'll be happy to look at those and see if they're similar to what I'm doing.
Similar. Okay. Sounds good. Anything else?
Can I do an advert, please, Maria?
Sure.
Just to mention, there's another chapter of the AccessUserGroups.org starting next week called Access Europe, and it'll be exactly the same time, but it will be the first Wednesday of each month. The very first inaugural session is Wednesday, the 2nd of March, and I will now copy into the chat the web link for that. Thank you for the free advert, Maria.
Yep, no problem. Always happy to advertise another AccessUserGroups.org.
Sorry, and one last thing, and I'd love to see all of you and others as well there.
All right.
So I'd say if you can make this meeting, you can make mine as well. Same time.
All right. If not, what was that?
Thank you very much, Maria. You showed us a lot of stuff and a few things I didn't even know yet. I thought I knew quite a bit about it.
It's a deep subject. The reason I chose it was because several people have asked for it. So that's in the past couple years. And I was a little bit leery about it because 2 recent Access ET webinars were on it, but those were so different from what I had in mind that I decided just to go ahead.
Thank you. I also learned I didn't know about the bound column 0 that you did before, or whatever the right phrase I should be using is. That was new to me. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all, and hope to see you maybe at Colin's webinar, and if not, in April for our next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria.